please. My name's David. I'm from Ballarat, as you know, and it's good to be down here in Geelong, or almost Geelong anyway. Thanks for coming out. Meetings in person are just so much better. I don't know what it is that the Lord put inside us, the intangible stuff that we can't see and don't really know how it works, but for some reason we just need to be around each other. It doesn't quite work the same as we found out last year when we're not. So praise the Lord, we can meet together again. It's really, really good. Things are going well in Ballarat. We've had some good weather. That's news. Like you down here, we're looking for revival. Not necessarily getting it in terms of new people at least, but people are rejoicing in the Lord, and we're very mindful of our neighbouring Victorian fellowships as well. So if any of them knew I was coming here tonight, they would have said hello. So hello, consider yourself greeted on their behalf. Acts chapter 27. So Acts chapter 27 is a really dramatic chapter. Many of you probably know. It's a story about a shipwreck. So we're going to read through. And just before we do, in your Bible, you might have some maps at the back. Alright, they might look a little bit like this, or maybe they look a little bit different, but there'll be one like that, and that's actually, you can probably see the bottom of Italy over here. We all recognise Italy, it's the blue. And then you've got Greece, and then you've got Turkey, and down here's Africa, and all of that blue is the Mediterranean Sea, right? So hopefully you're reasonably familiar with that part of the world. So all these squiggly lines are Paul's journeys, right, and where he went, and which of course lots of the book of Acts details. And the one that we're going to follow a lot of tonight, at least in the first part of this talk, is his journey to Rome. So if you've got the map and you want to sort of keep a finger in there, you can sort of refer to the places as we go through this chapter and see how they tracked and so on, because this chapter is all about his journey on a ship. I've called this talk a total loss of control. When you two are ready, I'll begin. A total is just being naughty in the front. This is why they sit in the front, you see, so we can keep an eye on it. A total loss of control. That's the title of the talk tonight. So let's start reading. Verse 1, and when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band. Alright, so Paul is a prisoner and he's been taken to Rome because he wanted to go and appeal before Caesar over something that happened. And entering into a ship of Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail by the coasts of Asia, so underneath, around Turkey, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon, which is today in modern-day Lebanon, I think, or thereabouts. And Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus. So if you look at your map now, under Cyprus doesn't mean to the south of it, it means in between Cyprus and the southern coast of Turkey, because they were using Cyprus, which is quite a large, long island, to shelter from the wind, as it says there, because the winds were contrary. So as we read through, there's quite a bit of sailing terminology. This chapter is actually quite famous in the sailing world, particularly amongst sailing historians, because it goes into such amazing and accurate detail about the way that they used to sail and the things that they would do in the circumstances that we're going to read about. It's very accurate. Of course it is, it's in the Bible. But verse 5, and when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us therein. So they've now changed to a new ship. Now this ship of Alexandria probably was part of the Roman or the Alexandrian grain fleet, and they serviced the Roman Empire. Now Rome needed huge amounts of grain, and it came from Egypt and parts around Egypt. From Alexandria in particular is where these ships took off from. So they would sail from Rome through the Mediterranean down to the top of Africa there, Alexandria, and then back to Rome, carrying huge amounts of wheat, right? Grain. The Alexandrian grain fleet were the biggest, the fastest, and the best ships of the time, and they had crews to match. One ship that was discovered many hundreds of years later by archaeologists, was around about 50 metres long. So these were large vessels, sea-going vessels, and they were the best, right? They were actually at the charge of Rome. It might have been a private business, but they were certainly under the charge of Rome, and they knew what they were doing, these people. So they've been put on this grain ship. Excellent crew, very experienced, they knew what they were doing. Verse 7, and when we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmone, and hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lasea. So what it's saying here is that the wind wasn't really cooperating. Of course, they didn't have motors back then, so even though these ships were fantastic, they still needed the wind to push them along. They used sails. This wasn't a rowing ship with lots of prisoners to row. This was a sailing ship from the sounds of it. So they were going slow because the wind wasn't cooperating. So they decided to go underneath Crete, which is another island in the Mediterranean. Again, refer to the map if you've got it there. They're now going underneath the south of Crete because the wind is coming probably from the north or even northwest, not allowing them to move in that northwest direction because it's probably pushing a bit against them. So they decide to use Crete this time as some shelter. Again, these are people who really know what they're doing. They sailed this route many times over the years, right? And they know quite well. They came to Fair Havens and so on. Now, verse 9. When much time was spent and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, the fast there refers to the Day of Atonement, which would have been late September, early October. So in the Mediterranean, that's coming into winter. Now, that's the middle of autumn, coming through into winter, and that's when sailing gets dangerous, in that part of the world at least. So Paul admonished them, and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, which means they didn't want to keep the ship in that particular harbour through the winter, probably because it was open to the elements, they decided that they need to move. The more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenice, and there to winter, which is an haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. Possibly it had a double harbour there, and you could choose which one you wanted to be in, depending on what the season was, and you could find one that would be safe from the winter winds and all of that. So they decided they're just going to go a little bit. Crete's not a huge island. They might go a little bit further along to this place and stick into this double harbour, and there they were going to winter. And when the south wind blew, verse 13, softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence they sailed close by Crete. So this is good. They've got what they wanted. They just want to hug the coast, come around to this bay where they're going to winter. Excellent. Verse 14. But not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. Probably a very strong storm coming in from the east. The wind itself probably a very strong northeasterly sort of wind. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. Okay, so again, these are very experienced sailors. They know the weather, they know the water, they know the wind, they know what they're doing, alright? So if they've decided that they're not going to be able to continue on the track that they were going because this new wind had sprung up, they now have decided just to let the wind take it. Alright, that's probably what is meant here by we let her drive. Just going to let it go, because if we keep trying to fight against this wind, we'll probably capsize the ship. That's what they had to do. Verse 16, and running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat. So there's a lot that is said in these verses, which perhaps doesn't quite yet, at least, indicate the severity of the situation. So they've been blown away from Crete. So remember the first plan, get round to this harbour. Forget that now. That's completely off the cards, because this new wind has come through and is blowing them away from Crete. It's blowing them through the Mediterranean. They've just come under this little island called Clauda. and that's given them enough shelter to do a few things they need to do. One of them is to come by the boat. So what that means is that they're going to get the life raft, or the little dinghy that they might use to, when you sort of get close to a beach in a big ship, you need a smaller boat to go to land. Is that sort of a boat? They need to bring that up into the ship, because at the moment it's trailing along behind and it's dangerous like that. So they're using the bit of the shelter they've got from using this island, sheltering from the wind, right, to pull that boat up into the ship. Verse 17. So that was a fair bit of work, as you can imagine, which when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship. So now that they've got the boat, the little boat, up onto the big boat, right, or at the very least, tied very tightly to it, they're now going to do something which is really quite incredible. Apparently it was very common, but quite incredible when you think about it. They're going to use very, very big, strong cables and pass them underneath the boat from front to back or back to front, right, so that you've got this cable that comes around both sides of the boat. It's underneath in the water as well, and they'll tie it really, really tightly together so it holds the boat together. Now, what does that tell you about how strong the storm is that they're in at the moment, that they need to tie the boat together? Now, these are brilliantly made boats, of course. Even back then, they knew how to make boats. But this is what they had to do to get through this storm. These are experienced sailors. They know what to do. They know what to do. They're sort of losing control a little bit, but they've got their tactics, and they know what to do. So that's what they're going to do, and they did it. Undergirding the ship, pulling it together, making sure that this constant buffeting and battering doesn't literally tear it apart. In the middle of verse 17, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, struck sail, and so were driven. So there's some very large, well-known quicksands at the top of North Africa, which is the direction they were being blown in. Known as a bit of a graveyard for ships. They didn't want to end up there for obvious reasons, and so they've decided to do this thing called struck sail or straight sail. There's, I looked it up. I'm not a sailor myself, so I've had to research most of this. There's disagreement over what that means. It's possible they took the sails down completely and just let the boat go. That may not make a lot of sense when you think about the direction the wind was already pushing them in. It's possible they just left one sail up. Some people think they cut the mast down completely. Others think they put the sail in the water to use as a drag, like an anchor, to really slow up the boat. Don't know. Maybe Jimmy, do you know? No? Okay. Alright. Well, never mind. But again, they knew what they were doing, and they had a reason for doing it. Verse 18. And we, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. Wouldn't make sense for them to cut the mast down before lightening the ship, probably. So whatever struck sail was, it didn't help. So now they're chucking stuff overboard, whatever's not needed, other than humans, and the stuff that they need to continue on with their journey. Everything else is going over the side now. That probably means all of the wheat as well, which was the whole point of this journey for at least the Alexandrian crew in the first place. So they're chucking it all over the side. You've got to make it light so we don't sink. Verse 19, and the third day. Who's ever been on a boat? Ever been on a boat? Any sort of boat, doesn't matter. Yeah? Okay. Who's ever been on a boat in a little bit of rough water? Just a little bit of rough water. How was it? Awful. Right? Yeah, absolutely awful. We went on our honeymoon out on a boat twice, I think, and we've only done it once or twice since. As it turns out, I'm not bad on a boat, although it wasn't rough. I don't want to try it out rough, but Lily had a hard time of it. We were going out to see some whales or something, weren't we, and the Great Barrier Reef and that sort of thing, and yeah. You know, it doesn't go well for a lot of people as soon as you get just a little bit of this. Well, this is the third day of it. And not just a little bit of this, but a little bit of this. Up and down and up and down, right? This is what's going on. Bash, bash, crash, waves, the salty, stuff getting stuck on you. You know what it's like being out at sea or down at the beach, even just a couple of hours, and you feel kind of tacky, and you go home. Well, this was not a day at the beach, right? This is 3 days in a storm. So this is a horrible, horrible situation. And the third day, we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. Again, I don't really know what that is. All I know is that it's used to actually run the ship. Right? So now stuff that's actually needed is going over as well. That's how severe this is. You can probably read into what the sailors are thinking here, and then it gives it to us in verse 20. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, which tells us a few things. It means it had been cloudy that whole time. It also tells us not so much that they couldn't see the light of day. Obviously it got light when it was day and it got dark when it was night. But the sun and the stars are used for navigation, back in those days at least. So now they can't tell which way they're going. They don't know how to head on the right direction. In many days appeared, and no small tempests lay on us. All hope that we should be saved was then taken away. Wow, so much for the best, the fastest, the biggest ships in the Mediterranean. So much for the best, most experienced, strongest, wisest crews in the Mediterranean. For all of that strength and for all of that knowledge and intelligence and experience and human endeavour and courage, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, I told you so. You should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. At this moment when all hope was lost, literally, all hope was lost, one person comes into the picture and says, wait a minute, there is hope. And that's a familiar story to us. We may not have been on a boat in this sort of circumstance and for this long, but we know the sound of that. We know the sound of hope when it looks like it's all drained away. Verse 23, For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. But when the 14th night was come, we skip from the 3rd to the 14th now quite quickly. When the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria. That's not the Adriatic as we know it now, it's part of the Mediterranean. About midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. That's really interesting, isn't it? Midnight, so it's dark, right? It's getting on towards winter. They're not anywhere near the Arctic, so there's no way the sun was up or anything like that. It's probably still cloudy. There's no moonlight. How do these guys know? Well, again, they're the most experienced, best crews in the Mediterranean. They know because they just have that instinct, don't they? They just have that experience. Maybe some birds, maybe the sound of the waves against the ship, or maybe they could hear a distant beach, waves crashing, or something like that. I don't know what it was, but they knew, even in the darkness, this is how good they were. They deemed that they drew near to some country and sounded. So they let down the rope with the knots tied in it at certain distances, and they let it down until they felt that it hit the bottom, right? That's a way of measuring the depth of the water underneath them. And what did they find? Found at 20 fathoms. I'm really not sure what that is in metres or anything like that. James, do you know? You don't use fathoms? No? Okay. Alright, doesn't matter. Jimmy's probably been lower than that though. 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again. So let down the rope again. 15 fathoms. It doesn't matter whether you know how deep that is. What you can tell from this is that it's getting shallower. And if you're in a big boat, that's bad. That's bad, okay? You don't want to go too shallow. Then fearing, alright, battle stations again. Then fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors. This is the best crew in the Mediterranean, and this is their answer. They cast 4 anchors out of the stern, out of the back of the ship, and wished for the day. That's the best they got, right? They didn't wear wristwatches, they couldn't see the stars, maybe they sort of had a bit of an instinct of how late it is, they may have known there's quite a few hours until day, and the best they've got is to chuck all the big heavy anchors out the back, like that's like stepping on the brakes, right, in a car, and just say, please hurry up daylight so we can see what's going on. That's the best they've got. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, oh no wait, they do have something else. When they had let down the boat into the sea, remember the little boat they tied up all those days ago? They're now letting it down into the sea under colour, or pretending as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. So all the crew have decided, right, blow this, we're out of here. All right, and they would have told the centurion and Paul and whoever else, we're just going over here to, yes, that's right, we're putting anchors out the front. Yes, that's what we're doing. Don't worry, don't look, stay up there at the back. But Paul knew what they were doing. They were really trying to put the lifeboat or the smaller boat down, get into it and take off. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, "Except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So they were onto it. Before the sailors could get into it, the Roman soldiers come along with their swords, cut the ropes, and there goes the lifeboat. Down into the water, maybe it smashed against the water, I don't know how high up it would have fallen from, but that was that. So they couldn't escape. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, "This day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued, fasting, having taken nothing. Wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health. For there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you." And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. It reminds me of someone else doing a very similar thing. Then were they all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And we were in all in the ship 216 souls. That's 276 people. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat. Now they're casting out the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they knew not the land. So they can see now. And they were right. There was land there. But they don't know what it was. These are the best in the Mediterranean. They've sailed every inch of this sea, but they don't know where they are. But they discovered a certain creek, or perhaps a bay, with a shore or beach, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. So once again, this very experienced crew in the biggest, baddest, bestest ship in the Mediterranean, all they've got is to throw this thing at the shallow sand and hope they can all jump out and just sort of wade or swim onto the shallows. This is their plan now. And when they had taken up the anchors, or cut the anchors and left them in the sea, the ones that they threw out of the rear of the ship in the night, they committed themselves unto the sea and loosed the rudder bands. So don't worry about steering anymore. Get rid of that, don't need it. It's like taking the steering wheel out of the car. And hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and put the clutch in and revved the pedal, right, rev the engine as hard as they could, and then let the clutch go. Basically is what they're doing now, and made toward shore. Alright, cut the anchors, throw up the biggest sail we've got, let the wind take us towards that beach. That's their plan. And falling into a place where two seas met, so even this goes wrong. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken, or being broken up with the violence of the waves. So even this wonderful plan to try and ground the ship is going wrong. And everything's so tough and so violent that this great big ship is now being smashed to bits by the waves. It's probably stuck on a reef or a sandbar or something like that. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest, some on boards, so they kept the surfboards with them, and some on broken pieces of the ship, and so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. Wow. That's a rollicking adventure, isn't it, to read about? It wouldn't have been very nice being there. So what we have here is a total loss of control. Total loss of control in circumstances and including people that knew exactly what they were doing. In circumstances that they had been in many a time, and they had the best equipment, and they had the most knowledge, and it should have been an easy sail from Alexandria, perhaps stop over in Crete or wherever, and then on to Rome as winter finished, right? And instead, everything went wrong. Control completely lost. They tried applying their experience all the way, even at the end there. I mean, running it, I made light of it maybe, but running it towards the beach was the best thing they could do at that time. And they used their experience and wisdom to do that, and even that didn't go to plan. Let's go to Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5, verse 1. So it says there, and the they is Jesus Christ and his disciples. They're in a boat and they're crossing the Sea of Galilee. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him, or subdue him, or calm him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains, and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. Here's a shipwrecked man. Here's a man who's been on a voyage like the one we just read. He's been on a voyage like this in his life, and he's ended up on the rocks with the waves smashing up the back of the ship. And this is his state. He's out of control. He's unrestrained. He's not wearing anything. He's beyond shame. He's beyond grief. All he's got is this anger and this impure, unclean spirit controlling, running his life. Complete loss of control. Complete loss of dignity. Maybe we sometimes feel, despite our skill, despite our education, and despite our knowledge, despite our other wonderful attributes, whether it's mental strength, physical strength, our experience in the world, our experience in the Lord, our knowledge of certain things, our smarts, our streetwiseness, despite all that, we lose control. It's taken away from us. Sometimes it feels like completely. Now, I'm not suggesting any of us are like this man, of course, and this is a story about a guy who is possessed with devils. I'm not going down that avenue tonight. I'm not suggesting that's the cause of anybody's problems or anything like that, but just the state of the man and the state that those people found themselves in on that journey. Despite having everything going for them, this is where they found themselves. They ended up, in a way, like this bloke. His only place was to sit with the dead, waiting to become one of them, crying and cutting himself. No one could do anything for him. They tried, but they just couldn't. Those things in our life that sometimes take control away from us, external circumstances like health or relationships with other people, things within ourselves like addiction, lust, fear, uncertainty. There's been a lot of that over the last 18 months. Confusion, self-doubt, self-loathing even. That deep melancholy that seems to be so characteristic of our wonderfully civilised, well provided for generation. Apathy, cynicism, distrust, bitterness, hurt, hatred, fear, anger. Those are all things that can make us feel a bit like this bloke. Perhaps not as dramatic, but on the inside. Or like the people ended up in that ship. Let's read on. Verse 6. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him. He had one thing left, and he had one thing going for him, and that was that Jesus Christ came across him, and he saw him, and he ran toward him and worshipped him. And the word worship means he either fell on his knees or even lay right down on the ground in front of Jesus Christ. He did one thing right at least. Let's read on. And cried with a loud voice and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, that is, Jesus said unto this man, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. Jesus recognised what was happening straight away. And he asked him, What is thy name? And he, that is the man, answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. A Roman legion, if that's the reference, was 6,000 men plus some cavalry as well. So with this guy, perhaps it's a little bit the devil's talking, a little bit him. It is him, it's not him, it's not him, it is him. He's completely confused, he's completely all over the place. This legion that's inside him, I don't know if it's indicative of 6,000 or perhaps just a very large number, but clearly things are very, very bad for this man. All control's been taken away from him. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding, and all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. There's such confusion in this man. When you read through this, it's not clear when it's actually him speaking and when it's the devil speaking. That's how much his life has just been taken over. Sometimes the thought of, the way he reacts at the start after worshipping Jesus, sometimes the thought of having our problems resolved can become scary in itself. We almost get used to this just sort of being buffeted and battered and so on. We know we probably want something better, but we're used to this loss of control now. In the middle of it all, Christ got to work. Like Paul, making these cameo appearances on deck. Don't worry, I'm going to sort it out. It's going to be sorted out. God's in control. Paul said, I believe God. It's one thing to believe in God, it's another thing to believe God. Many people believe in God, even the devils believe in God and tremble. But it's another thing to believe what he says and to act upon it. And that's where this man's coming to. Verse 13, and forthwith Jesus gave them leave. It's amazing power. He just sort of like granted them a permission slip and they were allowed to go out of the man. This is who we deal with. This is who's come to live inside us. This is the control and the power that Jesus Christ has. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave, and the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. Far out. That would have been dramatic. And now that this man is clear of the thing that beset him, because it's all gone out of him and gone into the swine and made them do what they did. What a dramatic thing to watch. Perhaps once we're clear of a tribulation or something that's really getting us down, then we actually really see what we've just been delivered from. It can actually be much, much worse than we thought. Maybe we've had those sorts of scenarios before. Verse 14, and they that fed the swine fled and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. And they come to Jesus and see him that was possessed with the devil and have the legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind. What an amazing transformation that is. I love this story. It brings, almost tears to my eyes. Not really, that's probably actually just smoke or, something. But, it's just a wonderful, touching story. When you read about this guy in verse 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and his hopeless scenario, and then we get these three things here. Sitting, clothed, so he's at peace, he's got his dignity about him, and in his right mind. He's temperate, he's controlled, he's calm, he's dignified. No more shame now, no more fear now, no more anger now. Why? All because despite his circumstances he did one thing right. And that was when he saw Jesus, even afar off, he closed the gap and he ran to him and he fell down before him. He threw himself at Jesus' feet. The people that saw it there were afraid, and they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed with the devil, and also concerning the swine, and they began to pray him to depart out of their coasts. Can't expect others in the world to understand what Jesus Christ can do for us and for them as well all the time. It's a bit sad, that's how it is. We'll finish this story and then I'll wind up. Verse 19. Did I read 18? No. And when he was coming to the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. And wouldn't you? This guy's just come along and completely turned your life around. Completely changed it. Completely healed you. Completely delivered you and set you free. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but saith unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion or mercy on thee. Go and announce it. Go and declare it. Go and spread this good news, because you can't keep it to yourself. Go, let your testimony shine for them. And he departed and began to publish in Decapolis. That's not just one city, that's actually a group of 10 cities. Think about that. That's what this guy went and did. He went around these 10 cities, not just one. He wasn't content with one. He wasn't content with just his home or that of his friends or his street where he grew up or all the relatives and so on. He went through that city and then he thought, right, I've done that city. Right, next one. He went through 10 cities, publishing, declaring, announcing what Jesus Christ had done for him. And the end of that verse. And all men did marvel. Praise the Lord. All men did marvel. Luke chapter 4 to finish. Christ's compassion and work and miracles and power ought to be declared and announced to others. So we've looked at two stories, one in a fair bit of detail and one in a bit shorter, but there's still a reasonable amount of detail, and they both illustrate this total loss of control. And what I hope to bring out is perhaps, if you've ever felt like that, or if you're in a situation right now where you feel like that, or the next time you're in a situation where you feel like that, there is one thing you can do. You can believe God, and you can throw yourself at Jesus' feet. That's the best place to be. Throw yourself on the rock, break yourself on the rock, and He'll provide. This is what He came to do. Chapter 4 verse 16. And he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah, and when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And he closed the book, and he gave it again to the minister, and sat down. And the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began to say unto them, This day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. Jesus came to resurrect those that have been shipwrecked in life. That's what he came to do. That's what these verses are about. If you go back to Isaiah, you can read them. We're not going to do that now. But it also talks about providing beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. How is that a fair swap? Tell me, why should we be given beauty for our ashes? Why should we be given joy for where we were sad, for where we were overwhelmed with grief? That's not a fair swap at all. And that's the whole point of it. God's grace abounds. God's grace exceeds our expectations. It's been delivered to you and I again and again and again and again. If you want to avail yourself of it, first repent, be baptized, receive the Holy Spirit. You'll speak in tongues, and then you'll start to know what Jesus' mission really was. As it says there, the gospel is preached to the poor, the brokenhearted are healed, the captives are delivered, those that are bruised are set at liberty. That's what happens. If you feel shipwrecked in your life, if you feel like all control's been taken away, throw yourself at Jesus' feet. This day, this scripture can be fulfilled in your life as well. What the people say. Amen.